The closing arguments in the Sean Diddy Combs trial revealed some shocking details. Prosecutors described Diddy as the head of a criminal group involved in kidnapping, arson, robbery, and sex trafficking. His close friends and security team were said to help him with his alleged illegal activities. The prosecution claimed that drugs were readily available at Diddy's parties. They also presented evidence that Diddy allegedly held Cassie Ventura in a hotel room to hide injuries from an assault and that Capricorn Clark was forced to take a lie detector test. Diddy was also linked to the burning of Kid Cudi's car. Prosecutors showed video from 2016 of Diddy assaulting Ventura and allegedly paying to remove the evidence. They also accused him of forcing Cassie and another woman, Jane, into sexual acts using threats and drugs. Jane's story included claims of being lured by false promises and threatened with eviction. All part of Diddy's alleged plan for control. The prosecution called Cassie's decade with Diddy a masterclass in control, alleging abuse and blackmail. They presented his parties as staged events where victims felt pressured to perform. With sessions allegedly recorded for blackmail, the prosecution further alleged that Diddy's associates helped him with these crimes. His ex-chief of staff, Christina Khalil, was accused of arranging for escorts and handling money, acting as his right-hand person in the alleged racketeering. The case detailed serious accusations of sex trafficking, describing how women were allegedly coerced into sexual acts with strangers while Diddy watched. The prosecution stated that just one instance was enough to prove sex trafficking, and they had evidence of many more. Jane's testimony described a phase of love bombing, followed by Diddy allegedly grooming her and giving her drugs. She recounted hotel nights with escorts where she felt forced to have sex with multiple men. Texts were shown where Jane expressed discomfort, but Diddy allegedly ignored her feelings, using gifts and money to control her. He allegedly threatened to release sex tapes and used threats about her home as leverage. The prosecution presented an incident in June 2024, where Jane was allegedly assaulted and forced to perform oral sex on an escort, calling it sex trafficking. Cassie's decade with Diddy was portrayed as a period of intense control, with allegations of abuse and blackmail. She described physical abuse, including being punched and kicked, and being hidden in hotels to recover. The prosecution claimed Diddy assaulted her and made her hold guns for him. They showed hotel footage of Diddy allegedly assaulting Cassie and dragging her back to a room. The prosecution suggested Diddy's claim of retrieving drugs was a cover for his alleged violent control. The prosecution also stated that others in Diddy's circle, such as KK, Troke, and Fahim, allegedly assisted in these crimes. KK was accused of arranging travel for escorts and knowing about the alleged Wild King nights. Diddy's alleged threats to release sex tapes and his control over Cassie's life were presented as evidence of coercion, leaving her with few options. Allegations of forced labor were also discussed, with claims that Cassie and Jane were made to perform sexual services for days, always available for Diddy's demands. They alleged he used threats and force to ensure their compliance, leaving them exhausted. The prosecution also addressed claims of witness tampering and obstruction. They suggested that after Cassie filed her lawsuit, Diddy tried to influence Jane to change her story. Recorded calls were presented where Diddy allegedly tried to convince Jane that her experiences were consensual. They also accused Diddy of using his associate Troke to contact Mia, asking her to support a false account. The prosecution asked the jury to hold Diddy accountable for his alleged actions, stating it was time to find him guilty. They presented a series of accusations aiming to show a pattern of control, abuse, and exploitation over many years, involving many people. The defense, however, argued that the prosecution had brought too many charges and would try to prove just one. They questioned whether the victims' stories could be believed and suggested that some of the alleged acts might not legally qualify as crimes. The defense also noted that if Diddy were found not guilty, it might signal that such behavior is acceptable, while a conviction could lead to severe punishment. They suggested that while the alleged actions were disturbing, a life sentence might be too harsh. The success of the prosecution's case, they argued, would depend on the jury believing the victims and the evidence presented. The defense for Sean Diddy Combs has just delivered a closing argument that aims to flip the script entirely, suggesting this entire multi-million-dollar RICO case is less about serious crime and more about tearing down one of the most powerful black entrepreneurs in America. They're painting a picture where the prosecution has taken personal choices, intense relationships, and even alleged drug use, and twisted them into a narrative of a vast criminal empire. But here's the real bombshell the defense dropped. They claim the only real crime here, the only thing the evidence actually supports, is personal use of illegal substances. They argue the prosecution, instead of focusing on that, has gone to extreme lengths, using the most serious statutes on the books like RICO to label things like swinging lifestyles and personal drug habits as a massive, organized criminal conspiracy. It's a bold claim, suggesting the government is trying to make an example out of Diddy by using laws meant for something far more sinister. When it comes to Cassie Ventura, the defense isn't just calling her a witness. They're framing her entire involvement as part of a complicated, 11-year love story. They want the jury to see their intense relationship, their intense physical connection, and all the ups and downs as the foundation. They argue that Cassie herself even stated, in her own words, via social media, that the core issue was domestic violence, not the far more serious charges now being pursued. The defense is leaning hard on the idea that this wasn't a criminal enterprise, but a deeply personal, albeit flawed, romance. Then there are the explosive kidnapping allegations, specifically involving Capricorn Clark. The defense is dissecting this piece by piece, questioning how someone can be considered kidnapped if they repeatedly chose to go back to work for Diddy, even making more money after an alleged incident. They point to inconsistencies, like the supposed weapon that was never found, and suggests that a witness's story simply doesn't hold up under scrutiny. It makes you wonder, was this truly a kidnapping, or something else entirely? The defense also tackles the sex trafficking claims head-on, presenting them as consensual sexual encounters within a lifestyle that some might find unconventional. They're suggesting that when witnesses like Danielle Phillips mentioned not wanting to participate in certain acts, or when conversations turned to fantasies, it was all part of a consensual arrangement, not forced exploitation. They want the jury to see these moments not as trafficking, but as people exploring their intimacy, with the understanding that everyone involved was an adult, making their own choices. Regarding the drug allegations, the defense is insistent. It was personal use, plain and simple. They highlight testimony from figures like Brenda Paul, who apparently had charges dismissed after admitting personal use and having a good lawyer. The defense is drawing a line between someone having substances for personal use and using an entire business or enterprise to distribute them. They're arguing that just because Diddy might have had substances, it doesn't mean he was running a drug distribution ring through his businesses. A cornerstone of the defense's argument is the absolute lack of evidence for a true criminal enterprise, the very foundation of a RICO charge. They're pointing out that no one testified that they were part of a racketeering conspiracy, and that even figures like Christina Quarm, who the prosecution might link, are described by the defense as simply helpful people, not co-conspirators. Without an organized group and a pattern of criminal activity, the defense argues the RICO charges simply don't fit. The defense also tries to paint a more human picture of Sean Combs, suggesting that some of his alleged actions might stem from personal pain and shame. They referenced a witness who spoke about him carrying his shame and his pain, and that he wasn't a coward but someone willing to fight. This is a tactic to humanize him, to suggest that his troubles might be rooted in personal struggles rather than malicious intent to commit crimes. Ultimately, the defense is making a powerful plea to the jury: acquit Sean Combs on all counts. They are painting him as a target, a successful entrepreneur caught in a web of unproven allegations and questionable witness testimony. They're asking the jury to look at the evidence, or rather, the lack of it, for the major charges, and send him home to his family, proclaiming his innocence. The courtroom was buzzing as the prosecution laid out its final damning arguments against Sean Combs. They painted a picture of a man who simply refused to accept no for an answer, especially from those closest to him. It wasn't just about conversations, it was about control, exploitation, and a twisted form of business. What the prosecution is really pushing is that this wasn't just a series of isolated incidents. They argue that Combs orchestrated an entire operation, an enterprise, where his desires were met through coercion and financial incentives. They claim witnesses lied, but then they pointed to evidence suggesting that workers were flown across the country, not for friendly chats, but for unwanted physical interactions. It's been said that if someone experienced performance issues, their pay would drop, but they'd still receive thousands of dollars if they complied with his wishes. The prosecution then turned to the disturbing allegations of kidnapping. They highlighted an incident at the London hotel where Cassie was allegedly forced to hide after Combs allegedly stomped on her face. She was reportedly not allowed to go home to her mother, a situation the prosecution labeled as clear-cut kidnapping, demonstrating a severe lack of freedom for those around him. Then came the claims of arson, described with a chilling detail. The gloves supposedly fell off someone's hand. The prosecution stated Combs admitted he would do it, and then he did. They also brought up accusations of bribery, suggesting that after a violent incident, hotel guards were allegedly paid off to keep quiet, implying an attempt to erase evidence of wrongdoing. The discussion moved to illegal substances. While the defense might talk about conspiracy to distribute, the prosecution emphasized that simply giving illegal substances to Cassie and Jane amounted to distribution. They dismissed the defense's theory that these women wanted to be beaten, have unwanted relations, or spend days with strange men in compromising situations. What's being presented is a chilling picture of what's known as trauma bonding. The prosecution suggests that these women felt trapped, and the cost of keeping them in this state was seemingly insignificant to someone of Combs's reported wealth. They claim he allegedly pushed Cassie to continue even after she vomited, knowing she didn't want to, and that he stayed to maintain control. The defense's narrative, that these women actually desired these experiences, is being directly challenged. Why would Cassie, who has reportedly already received a settlement, risk perjury in a federal trial if she were lying? The prosecution argues she's standing up for what's right. Mia has already settled, so there's no apparent motive for her to put on a show. Jane doesn't intend to sue, yet these women are speaking out, refusing to let their past trauma consume them. This struggle, this courage to speak, is what tells you these women are telling the truth. They've broken free from alleged manipulation. The prosecution made it clear that jealousy isn't a defense to trafficking. When Jane allegedly picked out certain individuals, it was described as her way of reclaiming some control. While she texted about escorts sometimes, the prosecution claims this was under duress, that she felt she had no choice, which amounts to coercion, the prosecution then re-emphasized the alleged physical violence, noting that Cassie herself stated Combs hit her during these encounters. Danielle Phillips also testified about this, and it's reportedly even on video. There were claims that during a violent encounter, Combs was in a towel, the situation wasn't over, and there was no separation between the violence and the subsequent physical relations. Remember when Cassie allegedly odd in a hotel room in Long Island? The prosecution claims the freak-off continued even then. They also detailed an alleged incident where Jane performed oral relations on Anton after Combs had beaten her, a scenario the prosecution is labeling as trafficking. The idea that Cassie won a prize like a freak-off with something unpleasant in her mouth is being called ridiculous. The prosecution highlighted that when Cassie allegedly tried to get help and called security after being kicked, Combs allegedly stayed to keep control. They also mentioned Anton was brought up because he was a repeat player in LA, and that they stopped working with Cabra after he allegedly tried to extort Jane. Any talk of a conspiracy between Jane and Anton is reportedly not supported by evidence. The focus remains on Combs's alleged coercion. They've stated repeatedly, he coerced Cassie and Jane, and nothing happened. He allegedly beat Cassie, and nothing happened. He was caught on tape, beating Cassie in a hotel and then allegedly bribed guards to cover it up, and still, nothing happened immediately. He seemed untouchable. The prosecution believes he never thought these women, along with former associates like Kid Cudi and Deontay Nash, would come forward and back them up. The prosecution concluded by asserting that the defendant is not a god. He stands equal before the law. They are urging the jury to find him guilty on all counts. The jury is expected to receive instructions from the judge on Monday, outlining the laws related to each charge before they begin deliberations for their final verdict.